Welcome. Man, it is good to see everyone. It's good to be here with you all. I am grateful for another chance to dig through such an amazing book, Revelation, with each of you. So it's good to have you. I hope you're doing well. I hope that life is treating you well. I have already started. Look at that. Already halfway through. It's one of those days. I hope that this weekend as well. Today is probably going to be the only day this weekend that we'll be going through Revelation, just because it's Mother's Day on Sunday, and out of respect for my wife, I'm not going to go live on Sunday. So I hope you all have a fabulous weekend. Excited for today's conversation. We're going to finish up chapter 6 of Revelation. We're going to dive into chapter 7, which is awesome. Before we do that, a couple of things I want to update everyone with. Just as a reminder, some of you may have seen the last kind of content that was dropped, not live stream, but the last content that was dropped was the 3-part series on Should We Keep the Law? So definitely want you to know about, number one, if you go over to the blog, which if you're not familiar with how to get to the blog, well, it's scrolling along the bottom of the screen. So you'll see, just click on blog articles. That's the easiest way to get to the most recent articles. And then the very top one, this is the last one that dropped. And I did this a little bit differently this time. I want you to be aware of what's going on here. This is the entire article written that was kind of talked out in the 3-part series. If you go all the way down to the bottom, a couple things I want people to know. Here are the 3 videos that you can find. If you're subscribed on the YouTube, you may have already watched these. Totally fine. That's great. But most importantly, I want you to know where all of the sourced articles are at the bottom that get quoted. So I want you to be aware of all of these, including even the video that gets talked about, the YouTube videos. So you've got all the links there. I always want people to be aware of kind of how to get yes, much of this content is my own, my own interpretation and understanding, but it doesn't just, I say this probably not enough. Most of what I think is not new information. I really haven't made up anything. Most scholars, like I can point to scholars that understand and teach what it is that I will generally put out. And so I'm not creating new theology here. I'm not creating new ideas. I'm just really researching and putting that into words for you all to study and research yourself. So that's what the website is for. And I want you to be aware of that. The second thing that I am most excited about is please do subscribe if you're not already subscribed, because next week is going to be fun. All right. Next week's going to be fun. I'm hoping that we will get the first couple of videos launched in the new covenant theology. We're going to be doing a deep dive, at least 7 episodes, at least. I think we'll be able to get them all in 7 episodes of covenant theology, kind of what it is. I've talked about this before, like what is the overarching concept? Why is it important? And then also just going through all the different covenants, the major covenants, and then kind of working through how that should inform us as we seek to understand Pauline theology, for example, and things of that nature. So that's coming, but that is not what I am most excited about. I am most excited about this. So we will have, I don't know if you have ever read Brian's book, okay, The White Elephant, but Brian has been kind to agree to coming on the show next week. It will be a Friday evening. I believe I'll get you the updated stuff. I'm going to be making a post and putting it in the live. So it'll be, if you're subscribed, you'll get notification of this. You'll know about it. But this is going to be exciting. This guy has done a major amount of research on kind of who Ellen White is, and really done a lot of significant testing and dialogue on it. So excited to have him on the show. I know that's a little bit more, geared towards the Adventist crowd. But I think it's also good for Christians in general to know, to know about it, to be informed anyways. All right. Now, before we dive into our conversation today, I always like to give some books, suggestions, and we're getting into chapter 7 today. I want to make you aware of a couple of commentaries on Revelation, and I'm going to do this a little differently because I don't have many of these in physical hard copy. I have invested a lot of resources into my Logos library. I'm actually doing an interview next week with one of the head individuals at Logos. I'll give you guys an update as that'll be more of a training on Logos software. But I wanted to inform you all of, well, a couple of good resources to be aware of that you can check out for your commentaries. And here we go. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. There we go. That's better. All right. So I'm going to click through some of these here just so you're aware of them. The two at the bottom are the ones that we have been paying most attention to, but I want you to be aware of some of these others that are just fabulous books, like just incredible books. Reading Revelation in Context, John's Apocalypse and Second Temple Judaism. This is by Ben Blackwell, John Goodwin, and Jason Maston. What's really interesting about this is this particular one. I'll go to the content section. I love resources like this. I apologize if it's a little bit small. Actually, I'm going to make it a tad bit bigger. So I love resources like this. And the predominant reason I love these types of resources is you'll notice that this is not just one person's understanding. Okay. This is, this really is several people giving expert ideas and comments and commentary on certain things. And so you've got multiple scholars. I actually have met David De Silva. He is an incredible scholar. Met him at Society of Biblical Literature. Ian Paul, incredible individual. Let's see, kind of scroll through down here. Any additional ones that I'm familiar with? Michael Gordman. So this is an incredible resource that I want you to be aware of. The next one, and I was actually using this, you'll see that it clicked into a specific area. I was actually using this in reference to some study I was doing academically on the spirit of prophecy. But this is the book, and we're actually gonna spend some time today with Richard Bauckham. Bauckham is incredible, just incredible. Okay, the climax of prophecy studies on the book of Revelation. I'm not going to go through all of these today on the left-hand side. I'm going to give you a couple of additional ones just to kind of take a peek at. I absolutely love this particular series as well. This is the Anchor Yale Bible Dictionary, or Anchor Yale Commentary Series. And I don't know how many, I think it's like 38, 39 books or something like that in this particular series. This is not a cheap series. So if you're looking to pick this up in hard copy, first of all, you're going to need an incredible amount of library space to buy some of these. My Logos library is somewhere around 33,000 books now. So incredible amount of research opportunity. It always cracks me up when people, ask me, well, have you looked at this or have you looked at that? Well, I probably have, and some. But this Craig Koister incredible work here. This is landmark commentary on Revelation. And then the last one I'm going to just share with you. This is another one of Craig Koister's. It's in a different series, but also incredibly good. Revelation and the End of All Things. This was put out, since his first publication in 2001. This is his second edition, which was released in 2018. I really appreciate and enjoy Erdman's publishing house. So Erdman's is always a pretty good publisher. So anyways, those are a few of the additional resources that I wanted you all to be aware of. I figured I'd do it just a tad bit differently. You see my dogs in the background here. That's just the way I roll. My dogs love to hang out with me while I'm studying. Got a couple of Huskies. If you've got Huskies, they're awesome dogs. All right, let's dive in. I want to have a quick word of prayer, and then we're going to dive straight into where we left off last. So let's bow our heads and have prayer. Dear gracious Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this day. Thank you for this time. Thank you so much for John's book, Revelation, the Apocalypse of John. And I just pray that we would continue to dive deep, that we would continue to seek your guidance. There is so much crazy theology, especially with today's day and age, with the changing situation with the Catholic Church and with denominations that really want to preach specific ideas from prophecy. And I just pray that most importantly, we would see you, the Lamb that was slain, that now stands at the right hand of God, that's seated, that is our priest king forever, that mediates on our behalf. And I just pray that most importantly, you would be seen and heard as we dive into some interesting parts of the end of chapter 6 and into chapter 7 in Revelation. I pray all these things in your precious and holy name. Amen. All right, friends, let's dive in. Now, last time we chatted, we actually ended with a not deep dive, but a little bit of a brief introduction into into First Enoch. We looked at First Enoch 18, 21, 46, 86, 88, and 90. And if you remember, we were specifically talking about falling stars with regards to Second Temple literature and kind of what might be the context that John might be looking at with regards to the fall or the falling stars concept. And then we kind of looked at Nicholsburg, and he's one of the prolific commentary writers on the Book of Enoch. He kind of dialogued with the First Enoch 86, 1-3 star imagery with regards to the Watchers, and then connect that into Daniel 12, and then also First Enoch 104. And all of this was in connection to Psalm 82. Now, we didn't get a chance. We ran out of time last time to kind of move that back into Revelation. So we're going to pick up there. I want to first just show you some star imagery with regards to, I'm going to make this a little larger. So, and one thing you're going to find as you continue to study along with me, I don't often do study and research with regards to the English words, whether it's the English words of the ESV, NLT, King James Bible, whatever version you prefer, NIV. Most of my searches are going to, and you can see this up in the upper left area where it says query. I'm actually searching in the ESV, but I'm not searching the English words. And this is an example of one way to move out of the English concordance approach, the Strong's concordance approach. I'm going to be writing some articles and stuff on that because I do believe that the Strong's concordance, I don't believe it's like worthless, but I do believe that we need to graduate from it. It's kind of archaic. It's Stone Age type research and study. And unfortunately, a lot of the Adventist apologists that I've engaged with, I'll leave names off, but they have 3 letters, start with A, end with L from an acronym. Um, um, that tends to be the approach that gets utilized, and it can easily lend itself to misapplying and misappropriating the text. And so here we have the actual the Greek word. I almost said Hebrew. The Greek word for star, which is being searched inside of the New Testament. So you can see as you kind of scroll through here, different implications to star. You know, the stars will be falling from heaven, and the powers in the heavens will be shaken. Notice interesting there in Mark 13, there's powers in heavens will be shaken. So there's these celestial beings that are connected with stars that are falling. There's this celestial imagery going on. First Corinthians, okay, there is one glory of the sun and another glory of the moon and another glory of the stars. For stars differ from stars in glory. That's an interesting passage, and I actually think it has less to do with physical astrology, astronomy, sorry, than actual than really anything. I think it actually has more to do with supernatural beings. Jude 13, wandering stars, interesting imagery there. And then we get into Revelation 1, where we get the 7 stars. And we all know that the 7 stars, when we were starting back in Revelation 1, what were the stars? Let's just go there. Revelation 1, chapter 20. We already had one example of, like, we studied this and we know that this isn't physical stars. We know that, right? As for the mystery of the 7 stars that you saw in my right hand, the 7 golden lampstands, the 7 stars are angels. There's a direct connection to the idea that stars can be seen and understood as celestial beings. And so that's not a far-fetched concept. It's probably way more common and gets used a lot in Revelation 1, 16, 20, chapter 2, chapter 3. We get into where we're at in chapter 6, chapter 8, chapter 9, chapter 12. I mean, there's a plethora of uses with regards to star imagery. All right, so I just think it's important that we understand that the authors of the Old and the New Testament, kept in their own context, right? Their ideas, their methodology, as well as other authors that would have been dealing with like Second Temple period imagery, and we looked at with First Enoch. They used the concept of star. They used and falling, okay, falling stars, that context, in connection with more than just actual cosmic stars. So this is more than just the sky is falling with meteors, okay, which that in and of itself probably causes some Adventists to trigger when they think of meteor showers with regards to end times prophecy. In fact, there are more instances where the idea of the author is meant to be supernatural. Okay, this context of stars is meant to be supernatural powers. There's more instances of that ideology than there is of the burning cosmic space fireball things up in the sky. Okay, and so when we get to Isaiah 34, which we talked about last time, Isaiah 34, I think this idea really it is really nailed down. It's an important, this is a big word, it's an important juxtaposition. And now when I was first studying and I saw this academic phrase, can't even say it, juxtaposition. First of all, I thought it was cool, but I didn't really even know what it was. Okay. So with regards to Isaiah 34, this concept of a juxtaposition, describing an eschatological judgment that includes the gods of the nations akin to like Psalm 82, along with human powers. Now, what is a juxtaposition? I have to think slowly as I say that. All right, here's what I'm going to do. I want to go straight to, I always like to get my definitions directly from good resources. So I'm just going to read this so that you are aware of what a juxtaposition is. This is coming from Old Testament Use of Old Testament, a book by book guide. Okay. Gary Schnitzker, something like that. And this is defined as juxtaposition refers to intentionally bringing together separate and independent scriptural contexts for mutual consideration, but without exegetical intervention. Juxtaposition may be thought of as a guide for do-it-yourself reading of Scripture with Scripture. Important examples include editorial subscriptions of Psalms pointing to spiritual narrative context and placement of Psalms side by side based on catchwords or the like. Okay, and then it says juxtaposition on a larger scale may be thought of as a constellation. So when we get, and that constellation isn't a reference to like the star imagery that we're talking about. I want you to understand that when we get to Psalm 82, which we talked about before, Isaiah 34, Psalm 82, which I think the accurate understanding for Psalm 82 is that these aren't human entities that are being judged here. These truly are gods. They are supernatural entities that are originally were designed to be put over place of certain geographical locations. We see that in context with the Tower of Babel and the separating of the nations, and then God placed gods over them as kind of rulers per se. And so I think when we see this and we kind of place Isaiah 34 up against what's going on, a juxtaposition up against Psalm 82 and the judgment and that kind of ideology, I think that helps us to understand kind of what's happening here. So in light of all this, I would say this: it is unwise to assume that what John describes specifically in Revelation 6, 13, and 14, and the stars of the sky fell to the earth as a fig tree sheds its winter fruit from shaken by a gale. The sky vanished like a scroll that has been rolled away or rolled up, and every mountain and island was removed from its place. I think that it would be unwise for someone to interpret that, or for us to interpret that, as a meteor shower or a near Earth asteroid impact or some sort of literal astronomical cataclysm of some situation. Okay. So I think that we have to understand in context, this is more, this would be better understood, I think, through the lens of John and his style of writing, okay, because he's looking to the Old Testament, that the judgment of the powers may in fact be intended in his meaning and his understanding here. I think that that's a fair assessment. Now, I'm not saying that is what it is, but I think it's a fair assessment when you're reading this. Okay. Now I want to check out what Beale says, because we have been spending some time when we were looking at these Revelation commentaries. One of the ones in my list here is this book, G.K. Beale, the Book of Revelation, a commentary on the Greek text. Fabulous author, G.K. Beale, incredible individual. And so remember that Beale isn't a commentary that is trying to push some sort of divine counsel idea or Psalm 82 supernatural. He's not trying to push, Michael Heiser's idea, which I've got his he's not trying to push a specific agenda that I've mentioned before with regards to the supernatural beings. So he doesn't have that type of an agenda, okay? But he actually notes this possibility in his own defense of not reading the content of these verses overly literal. Now, we're going to go to chapter 6. This is on his commentary on Revelation chapter 6, 12 to 14, where he says this. Make it a little larger for you. He says, on the one hand, the reference to stars, mountains, and islands as symbols of human or divine powers in the Septuagint, that's the LXX, the Jewish writings, and the Apocalypse itself would point further to a figurative interpretation. And then he kind of references, see below. So it's important to understand that even commentaries, even scholars that are really trying to handle the text well, they're going to caution the interpreter, be careful not to be overly literal with this type of imagery here. And when we see this type of language, remember that when scripture uses metaphorical, symbolic imagery, you could say figurative language, okay? Figurative language isn't always symbolic language, and symbolic isn't always figurative. It's not always the case, okay? But the point is not that we're talking about something that is less than real. Just catch this, okay? When someone says this is figurative or this is symbolic, what isn't being said is we're not saying that this thing isn't real, okay? We're talking about something more than real in a physical, earthly sense, meaning that symbolic and figurative things only hold their true meaning if you understand what the real thing is that's being used as a symbol or figurative language. Okay. So if I told you, this is always my favorite, go-to thing. If I told you that yesterday it was raining here at our house, and it was just torrential downpours, it was raining cats and dogs, you understand, I hope you understand what I mean by that, because it's figurative, right? But the fact that you understand it means that you know what a cat and a dog is, and you know what that kind of imagery means when I connect it with it's raining cats and dogs. You understand. Why? Because the things that I'm using to explain the analogy, the figurative language, the symbol, whatever it might be, has a literalness. In fact, it's more than just what it is. Yes. Adrian, you're right. Those poor puppies. Man, when it's raining cats and dogs, you better hope that they have a soft landing. All right. So I don't want to lose sight of what the purpose of the seals are in this passage either. Okay. The seals are very, very important. And what happens when all these seals are broken? What happens? Well, the backdrop for all of this is judgment. That's the backdrop of all of what's going on here in Revelation with regards to the seals. Okay. And I believe that there is judgment and actions going on that are against the earthly beings opposing the people of God, and the supernatural rebellious beings in opposition to God. We see this happening in many Old Testament contexts where you have a supernatural entity behind the nation or supporting a nation that is in opposition to God. That isn't something that should be surprising us if we're good students of the word. All right, so that's Revelation 6. Okay. And if you're brand new here and you're just getting started, if this is your first deep dive, then, well, you probably should start out at the beginning and kind of get started at where we've been so far. And so obviously we are dipping into Old Testament stuff with specific reference to altar, Zechariah's horses, the chariots, all that stuff we talked about. But John is also referencing Old Testament concepts. And if we don't know those concepts, that's going to be a little bit of a challenge, right? But he's referencing celestial judgment of the fallen gods, like the divine warrior who now is the lamb, and the imagery that's going on. So all of these things are drawing from Old Testament imagery, and they are going to frame what John is really trying to communicate as we're trying to understand what he's wanting us to get from this book. He's using Old Testament imagery to frame how he's trying to communicate and describe the terms of what he has been shown through his revelation. So more of this stuff. Again, it's probably all I'm going to say for now. I'm going to jump straight in from here. I'm going to jump into Revelation 7. But before I do that, I feel like it's a great time for us to do a little bit of a recap on the entire kind of where we've come from. Okay, because chapter 7 is the famous section of the 144,000. I have heard all kinds of different ideas and interpretation and whatever on the 144,000. I'm sure you have. We're going to work through some of the basics of the narrative, and we're going to also dig into some older stuff as well. But a little bit of a teaser, okay? Just a little bit of a teaser. Does this section of Revelation, specifically 144,000, does it factor into the Watcher story? And if you don't know what the Watcher story is, I'm going to tell you, we're not going to get through all of chapter 7 today. You need to go read the Watcher. You need to go read Enoch. You need to read it, okay? No, it's not canon. I get that, but you need to read it. So my question is, does this section, does the 144,000, does it factor into the Watcher story or not? Just an interesting question. Now, let's do a walkthrough. Revelation chapter 1, you get John coming on the scene. He obviously he goes into vision. He sees the 7 churches. You remember those churches as we get into the vision itself. He says some very specific things about them, and he writes specific letters to the 7 churches. Write what you see in the book and send it to the 7 churches. I'm going to step in for a second. Remember, these churches are real churches. This letter is going to these 7 churches, okay? There are some denominations that will interpret these as like the historical, walkthrough of the different ages of the church. I think that's heavily symbolic. I don't think that would have made any sense to anyone that John was writing to. I think that is an out of context interpretation. So he's talking about the lampstands and the stars, and you've got this individual that shows up on the scene, the Son of Man clothed with a long robe and the white golden sash, described very symbolic of someone else really important in the Old Testament that hopefully you remember was a part of our deep dive. Now, once we get into chapter 2 is the first church, right? So the angel to the church of Ephesus, we get a letter written. We talked about some details in there about that letter. You get the second letter, which is Smyrna. Details about it. You get the third letter, that is Pergamum, the third church. You get the fourth, which is Thyatira. Again, we're not going to go through all the details of each of these church. You go back and rewatch some of those. You get the next one, which is Sardis, and that breaks us into chapter 3. Then you get Philadelphia. We're still in chapter 3. You get Laodicea. And then out of Laodicea, at the end of chapter 3, we break into chapter 4. Now, remember, chapter 4 is this throne in heaven. Chapter 4, as well as chapter 5, is understood as a divine council scene room. So we talked about kind of the imagery of what's going on and kind of what's happening, whether or not this is an inauguration of this figure that we talked through, the lamb, and all the ins and outs of that. Who is this lamb individual? But here's the main question, right? The main question is, who is worthy to open the scroll and break the seals? So these seals are something that only a certain individual can break, a certain person. And so the big question is, who can do this? Well, good news is there is a person that can. So we go through kind of who the root of David conquered. He can. Okay, this Lion of the tribe of Judah, which this is a fabulous part of Revelation. I love it so much that actually I have the Lion of the tribe of Judah tattooed on my shoulder. So we go through the details of this, and then we get more details about the song they sang and the scrolls and all this stuff going through. Now, when we get into chapter 6, which we just ended chapter 6, chapter 6 is the 7 scrolls, the 7 seals. Okay. So remember, the 7 seals, we asked the question, did they have to get opened sequentially? Were they all opened at the same, broken at the same time? How you understand that is going to depend on kind of how you see certain parts of it. But as you go through each of these seals that must get broken and the nuances of them, the altar, the stars, which we just got done talking about, vanishing. Now you get into, that was a deep dive, a quick summary. Now you get into chapter 7. Okay. Now we're in chapter 7. So let's start reading chapter 7. And I'm going to read all of chapter 7 here. I'm going to first get some more coffee. But let's read chapter 7 together. I'm going to put this big screen so you all can see it better. After this, I saw 4 angels standing at the 4 corners of the earth, holding back the 4 winds of the earth, that no wind might blow on earth or sea or against any tree. Then I saw another angel ascending from the rising of the sun with the seal of the living God. And he called with a loud voice to the 4 angels who had been given power to harm earth and sea, saying, do not harm the earth or the sea or the trees until we have sealed the servants of our God on their foreheads. And I heard the number of the sealed, 144,000, sealed from every tribe of the sons of Israel. 12,000 from the tribe of Judah were sealed, 12,000 from the tribe of Reuben, 12,000 from the tribe of Gad, 12,000 from the tribe of Asher, 12,000 from the tribe of Naphtali, 12,000 from the tribe of Manasseh, 12,000 from the tribe of Simeon, 12,000 from the tribe of Levi, 12,000 from the tribe of Issachar, 12,000 from the tribe of Zebulun, 12,000 from the tribe of Joseph, 12,000 from the tribe of Benjamin were sealed. After this, I looked, and behold, a great multitude that no one could number, from every nation, from all tribes and peoples and languages, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed in white robes with palm branches in their hands, and crying out with a loud voice, salvation belongs to our God who sits on the throne and to the Lamb. And all the angels were standing around the throne and around the elders and the four living creatures, and they fell on their faces before the throne and worshiped God, saying, Amen. Blessing and glory and wisdom and thanksgiving and honor and power and might be to our God forever and ever. Amen. Then one of the elders addressed me, saying, Who are these, clothed in white robes? And from where have they come? I said to him, Sir, you know. And he said to me, These are the ones coming out of the great tribulation. They have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. Therefore, they are before the throne of God and serve him day and night in his temple. And he who sits on the throne will shelter them from his presence. They shall hunger no more, neither thirst any more. The sun shall not strike them, nor any scorching heat. For the Lamb in the midst of the throne will be their shepherd, and he will guide them to springs of living water, and God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. All right. Now, I'm going to say this multiple times. It's always good to read scripture all the way through. I mentioned this at the beginning. If you haven't yet read all of Revelation beginning to end in one sitting, you should do that, okay, as best you can. It really gives you an overview and a synopsis of really what's going on before you drill down into the details of the text. Now, a couple of observations from the first section that we read, okay? When I say the first section, I mean this section. First 8 verses, which is specifically around the 144,000 of Israel sealed. Okay, a couple of things. We want to pay close attention when we're looking at this to how John is using the Old Testament in the writing of Revelation. The obvious place to start is the tribes and their numbers. Okay, I absolutely love these comments, by the way. Keep them coming. These are awesome comments. These are great observations. They've washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. Richard, absolutely right. And I love the fact, just as a side note, how are their robes made white? We'll get to this. And what does it even mean? But notice that it says in the blood of the Lamb. That's what purifies. That is what makes that happen. Not in, dealing with the law specifically, not in doing, it's in the blood of the Lamb that does that. So we'll get to that in a hot minute. But a lot of times with these 8 verses, this first 8 verses in chapter 7, a lot of times where people will immediately go is just notice the tribes and the numbers, right? We notice that there are tribes of Israel. I'll put it on the screen again. Notice that, and I heard the number of sealed from every tribe. And then you get tribes laid out and you notice 12,000, 12,000, 12,000, 12,000, 12,000, 12,000. Okay. All the way through, right? Now, people have a tendency to get hyper focused on the 144,000. Okay. And you're going to get some interesting ideas on what this number means, especially if you go on to internet theology. You're going to get some crazy ideas out there in the internet world. But what does the numbers remind you of in connection to the Old Testament? I want you to think about this, right? We're trying to view this through the context of what John would be thinking about. So what would he be thinking about with regards to the Old Testament? When do these numbers show up? Anyone have an idea? Anyone want to put it in the chat? Anyone have an idea of when these numbers might come up? Now, the common response is the census that was populated. It's pretty common in Numbers chapter 1. Numbers is not a book that you and I would normally spend time. It's the book of Numbers was all about numbers. It's the census, okay? And so as you look at Numbers chapter 1, I want to notice that we have similar tribes, the sons of Israel. Okay. We've got similar tribes in here. Got Benjamin, Dan, Asher. You got Naphtali. You've got, these are the ones chosen. Okay. Notice you've got some numbers coming through here from the different tribes. This is a census that's going out. Different numbers, tribes of Issachar, tribe of Judah, tribe of Gad, Simeon. So just notice if you parallel that, if you juxtaposition, that's that big word again. Okay. Yes, Adrian. There's a different order. I'm glad you're pointing this out. And some of them are different. They're not identical. That's going to be key. And the numbers aren't the same at all. Okay. But understand that this is probably the first place that people go. It's a very similar process or overview as that we're going to find in Revelation 7. Now, David Aune, which we've referenced many times, okay, picks up on this. This is actually in his commentary out of, the Word Biblical Commentary, volume 52. There's actually several volumes that he does. I think 3 volumes, that he does on Revelation. So here's what he says in connection with this. The census is a specific form of list that occurs with some frequency in the Old Testament, where it is used for purposes of taxation. You've got some links there as far as where you could find that. I think it'd be easier if I do this for you all. He also says for labor conscription, for determining the cultic duties and social structure of the members of the tribe of Levi, for determining Israelite descent, but most commonly as a means of determining military strength. And there's a bunch of references there. This suggests that the census in Revelation 7:4-8 is for military purposes, a possibility that is partially confirmed by the present literary context of this pericope, since, according to Revelation 14:3-4, the group of the 144,000 consists exclusively of adult males who practice sexual abstinence, an ancient Israelite requirement for holy warriors. Now, I mentioned Bauckham. There's another reference to a Bauckham resource, okay? However, the absence of all military and holy war imagery from Revelation 7:4-8 makes this suggestion doubtful. Now, so he's like, kind of suggests this, but maybe not, okay? Don't you love it when they do that? Now, I should mention, so just understand there's potentially some military connection going on here, potentially, but I should mention that there is a second 144,000 mentioned in Revelation, and this was brought up, okay, specifically here according to Revelation 14. So Revelation 14:3-4, let's just read that real quick. I'm going to go back to actually verse 2. Actually, I start at verse 1, chapter 14. Then I looked, and behold, on Mount Zion stood the Lamb, and with him 144,000 who had his name and his father's name written on their foreheads. And I heard a voice from heaven, like the roar of many waters, and like the sound of loud thunder. That voice I heard was like the sound of harpists playing on their harps. and they were singing a new song before the throne and before the four living creatures and before the elders. No one could learn that song except the 144,000 who had been redeemed from the earth. It is these who have not defiled themselves with women, for they are virgins. It is these who follow the Lamb wherever he goes. These have been redeemed from kind as first fruits from God, for God and the Lamb, and in their mouths no lie was found, for they are blameless. Now, I'm going to reserve this section for when we actually get to chapter 14 to dissect it, okay? But okay, it's just there is an interesting added detail in this text specifically to the 144,000, if you caught it. They did not defile themselves with women. An interesting way of describing that, okay? Now, we're going to come back to this idea, okay? Again, when we, in the future, we're going to talk about this because it plays a unique role in the Watcher story. If you haven't, I'm going to say this multiple times, okay? If you have not read the Watcher's story and that dialogue, I would really encourage you to read Enoch and the Watchers. So we'll come back to that when we deal with the that particular issue. Now, David Owen, which is the commentary that we were reading out of, David Owen brings up the idea of the numbering that's used in the Old Testament as a military numbering for conquest. He mentions that. But then he kind of, if you noticed at the end, he kind of like, he mentions it and then he kind of backs away from it and says, it's there, but maybe there's a better possible explanation. And he goes, what he's going to go on is the hope of the restoration of Israel is where he's kind of headed. Okay. And this, I believe personally, is probably a better explanation because of a few things that are odd about the list with regards to military numbering. So there is a very interesting article. I'm gonna mention this. If any of you, I say this every time, okay? If any of you want some of these articles, quotes, ideas, I had someone email me the other day from Germany that's doing a further study on the Trinity after watching my historical analysis of the Orthodox position and the Adventist position. I think that was last week that I aired that. And he was looking for some resources. Okay. If you want anything, just scan the code, connect with me. If you're on the Discord server with the Answering Adventism, obviously I'm there. You can private message me on Facebook, friend me on Facebook. I'm happy to help in any way I can. But this particular article that we're going to work through, this is by Richard Bauckham. I have read multiple books by Richard Bauckham. He is a fabulous scholar, very well done with all of his work. And we're not going to read all of it. But if you want to, I can send it to you. That's totally fine. We're going to reference some of what he's saying, specifically with regards to the tribes. And this is the second thing that kind of stands out. We got the numbers and then we got the tribes. Okay. And the tribes and the actual arrangement. This was something that was already brought up by Adrian on the live stream. The different order and some of the tribes are different. There's something weird going on here. And so here's the article. Now, I have taken this article, which originally is a PDF, and I've converted it. That's the reason why it's actually in Logos. I've converted it into a digital format that I can use to search and highlight and all that stuff in my platform here. But this is what he says. Starting out, the order of, let's see, I want to make sure that I am in the right place. Yeah, let's go. Yeah, the list of the 12 tribes in Revelation 7 has several peculiarities which require comment. Okay, and this is an understatement, I believe. I think we're going to need to sit on this a little bit as we dialogue through it. Okay. So he says this, number one, The order of the list corresponds to no other extant list of the tribes. Catch that. Most significant is the fact that Judah heads the list. This is true of Old Testament lists in which the tribes are arranged geographically, moving from south to north. And there's some other references there. But the list in Revelation 7 bears no other resemblance to a geographical list. The only other Old Testament list of tribes which puts Judah first is that of Numbers chapter 2, verse 3, followed by chapter 7 and then 10. That is the tribes in their military order in the camp. So again, here, what Bauckham is stating, okay, he's making this comment about how there's a military flavoring to this, okay? But then I want you to notice what he says next, okay? But, again, the rest of the order of the tribes in Revelation 7 bears no resemblance to the list in Numbers 2. So just notice, okay, this is the very similar behavior to what we read in David Owen, right? So he has his own kind of pushback, okay? We're noticing some connections, but, okay, so he's saying, okay, yeah, there's some military stuff in here, but not enough for Bauckham as well as David Owen to think that this is really what the author, that John, is really trying to make us think about, okay? And I don't think we should, personally, I don't think we should lose entirely the sight of the military context connection, but I think it's fair to assess that it's probably not the biggest component, okay? I think it fits, personally, I think it does fit with spiritual warfare. But again, that's going to be for a later conversation with regards to the Watcher story and the connection to the Enochian story, okay? I think there's a reason here why we get some military sprinkling going on inside of what John is trying to share with us. But let's continue on to what Bauckham is saying here. And I'll just read the rest of this, okay? The best parallel is perhaps to be found in the Pseudo-Philo. Several other references here, a list of the tribes in the conventional order, but with Judah moved into first place. This is the best. This is because Judah was a tribe of Kenaz, Israel's military leader at the time. Now, he's going to go on and say this. This is point 2. The inclusion of both Joseph and Manasseh. Now, this is in connection. I'm gonna put this on the side screen here, just so you see this. Okay. Revelation 7, 6, and 8. Okay. You've got Manasseh and you've got Joseph down here. These are the two that's being kind of discussed here. So he goes on and says, the inclusion of both Joseph and Manasseh, rather than either Joseph alone or Ephraim and Manasseh, is unparalleled and has never been explained. Has never been explained. Now, I'm going to stop for just a second, because Ephraim and Manasseh, if you don't know, they were Joseph's 2 boys. And so after they're grafted into Israel, and that's actually, I believe it's Genesis 48, is the scene with Jacob crossing his hands and that whole thing, and that moving that whole story, right? After they are adopted essentially by Israel, by Jacob, you will often see Ephraim and Manasseh occupying the Joseph slot in the list of tribes. But what is interesting here is you get both, just catch it, you get both on the right-hand side. You get them separated, okay? You get the tribe of Manasseh. You get the tribe of Joseph, getting a 12,000 slot, okay? Like, what happened to Ephraim? Did you catch that? What happened to Ephraim? Where's my dude? All right. So Bauckham actually says, and I'm going to notice right here, this is unparalleled. Where did he say that? Right here. Unparalleled and has never been explained. Now he's going to go on. He says a possibility is that the author had in mind Ezekiel 37:15, the classic Old Testament prophecy of the reunion of the 12 tribes in the Messianic kingdom. Now, there's an explanatory item in these particular verses. Okay, the name Joseph has been glossed. You'll see here it's been glossed with phrases referring to Ephraim, okay, or Ephraim, in such a way that the reader could think that Joseph is here being used as a name for the tribe of Ephraim. So Joseph might therefore seem a suitable name for Ephraim in a list of the tribes of the eschatological reunited Israel. Okay. So again, we're going to stop here. So Bauckham's saying is really unusual. It's unprecedented, actually, that you have Joseph and Manasseh in a tribal list. Just catch this. You have it in a tribal list, and you don't have Ephraim at all. Then to summarize what he's saying, he says this. He basically says, well, if you go back in the Old Testament, you're going to find Ezekiel 37 that references Joseph there, because in Ezekiel 37, the context is the reunification of the tribes. You're going to find Joseph there, but Joseph is talked about in ways that would be associated with Ephraim elsewhere in the Old Testament. So maybe, okay, maybe a reader of John's Apocalypse, when he encounters Joseph in the list, will think Ephraim. And therefore, the sort of having Ephraim and Manasseh separated, okay, you have this expected symmetry going on here, okay? And then that's, at best, that's a guess. You hopefully caught that sense in what Bauckham was saying is, might be. I don't really know. No one's ever really been able to explain this and to make sense of it, but here's his stab at it in that context, okay? And I really appreciate Bauckham doing this, where he identifies like, yeah, I don't know that this is what it is, but you need to be aware of it. All right, so third point, the tribe of Judah in Revelation 7:7 might seem out of place in a military census. It was excluded from the two Mosaic censuses in Numbers 1, 2, and 26. Now, Levi, and I'm going through this. I understand that most people don't study the book of Numbers. I didn't really much until I was introduced to a lot of this with Dr. Michael Heiser, but no one really pays much attention to the numbers in their context. Okay, so just notice what Bauckham is saying is that Levi, the tribe of Levi isn't included, okay, in the two Mosaic censuses. Okay, the census in Numbers was basically, this is for warfare because they're going to go in and conquest the land. They're getting started on that. We're going to take the land and all the issues with the conquest. But the priestly tribe was excluded from that census. But here in Revelation, they're included. it's just it's a little bit odd. Okay. I mean, in the book of Numbers, they do get numbered, but not as part of a military engagement party. They're not part of the military forces. Now, Bauckham is going to go on here. He's going to say, however, in 1QM. Now, 1QM, if you're not familiar with 1QM, 1QM is the war scroll from Qumran. And this is sacred texts found at Qumran that are not in the Bible, okay? They were protected by the Essenes. So, although the priests and Levites do not fight with weapons, they play an essential part in the conduct of war, conducting prayers before, during, and after battle, and blowing the trumpets, which both direct the troops and call divine attention to the battle. Without them, the war could not be a holy war. Consequently, the tribe of Levi is organized on the same military pattern as the other tribes, and that's first QM 4:1-8, and can even be said to fight. Okay, again, yes, Adrian, church warfare, Levites get top spot. I will say that all of the community, when the nation went to war, all of them engaged at certain levels. They didn't all necessarily go out and fight on the battlefield, okay? But they all were engaged at some level. So this is sort of like it's sort of like spiritual warfare, praying, like the Levites were praying for the battle, which I think personally, I think this is a more fruitful trajectory when we're looking at this particular context in regards to John and Revelation and all the stuff for all of this to kind of pull together nicely. So those are the three main kind of anomalies that Bauckham notes right off the get-go about the tribes. Okay, he could have added, he doesn't, but he could have added more to it. Now, I'll just include it here. I'm going to actually mention this, okay, even though we're going to be talking about it hopefully in the next couple of sessions. But there's an omission. I don't know if you caught this, but there actually is an omission of the tribe of Dan. Let's go to the passage again. If you notice down here, you get Judah, Reuben, Gad, Asher, Naphtali, Manasseh, Simeon, Levi, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph, and Benjamin. What you don't get, let me go back to Numbers. Okay, if you notice down here, let me just get a couple of these. Here's Dan. Okay, of the people of Dan, their generation by clan, by fashion. Okay, so Dan gets excluded, poor guy, from this interaction. And so the omission, now I'm going to jump over to Bauckham again. I'm trying to find, all right, here we go. So, and again, the reason why this is a misspelled word is because I converted it. But the omission of Dan from the list must probably be regarded as arbitrary. One tribe. Now, let me just say this. I don't know that I agree with what he's saying here. I don't think it necessarily needs to be arbitrary, but Richard Bauckham thinks so. Okay. We're going to spend some more time on that later on. He goes on, one tribe was frequently omitted in order to achieve a list of 12. Now, that actually is true. Okay. Um, so it is true that because after Joseph, you have Ephraim and Manasseh. Okay. You've got two out of Joseph. So the number goes from 12 to 13. So you've got to take that. This is true. You've got to take one out in order to get to the 12. So that's true. But it's still Dan. Okay. And Bauckham knows this. He's going to add this. Okay. Pay attention here. He'll add it. He says the tradition that Antichrist was to come from the tribe of Dan, and that was first found in Irenaeus, Hippolytus de Antichristo, is unlikely to be pre-Christian, since the Antichrist figure of Jewish apocalyptic are invariably Gentile and pagan. In any case, even this would scarcely account for the exclusion of the whole tribe from the eschatological Israel. Now, I don't know how much you all have heard of this particular part where Dan, there is this tradition that from the tribe of Dan is where the Antichrist would come from. So again, just to summarize this, okay, he's going to note, Bauckham notes that Dan's excluded. There's an absence, okay? That would be kind of the fourth anomaly that he talks about. Now, Richard thinks, Bauckham thinks that it's arbitrary. I don't think that that's fair. He doesn't think there's anything really to it. There's no real connection because he's thinking that the whole idea here is something that springs from Christian tradition. That's his line of reasoning. Even though Christians use the Old Testament to get to this conclusion, he doesn't believe that it's present in Judaism. So again, Baukham's going to balk at this, pun intended. And I'm not going to dive deep into the Dan thing, the omission of Dan quite yet, but I promise you we are going to get into that. And if you haven't read much on that, I would say do some research on it. You can do some study on the concept of the Antichrist coming from Dan. You can kind of study ins and outs of all that. Kind of an interesting topic now, especially with the new Pope and having this horrible theology on that and whatnot. But those are the four anomalies that he's going to bring out. Okay. Now, again, the point now is that it does seem fair to me that the census list and the tribal arrangement is on target. Like I think that it's a census. Okay. I think we can conclude that. Maybe we don't have to do too much. I don't think we need to overemphasize the military side of this, but I do think it's wise to look at the census and there's a census going on. Okay. Maybe it really is about the portrayals and the restoration of the tribes. That could be in view. We don't know. But I think that is a possible, legitimate, on-target idea, this restoration idea. I don't think that necessarily means that the military element should be dismissed or ignored. I don't think that would be wise. I think John is using Old Testament themes and imagery. And so to portray, I think there's a lot going on here to portray opposition on earth to the forces of evil. This whole behind the scenes evil supernatural stuff. Who's going to turn, it's going to turn later on in the book of Revelation to be this Antichrist figure in the latter days. And just as a precursor, Antichrist isn't just one figure. There are lots of Antichrists. There have been lots of Antichrists, because ultimately an Antichrist is any entity or group that is in opposition to what Christ is kind of what his agenda is. Okay. So Oftentimes we get very narrow-minded in like there's one antichrist. So I think that spiritual warfare is a much better view here in context than than just a military engagement, like boots on the ground engagement kind of idea. Okay, so I think it should be. I think we should keep it in this bigger context of what's going on now. I want to. We've got a few more minutes here. I want to drill down on a few other questions and thoughts. I want to. I want to mention something from. There is um, another book here that I would mention. I've mentioned this individual a couple of times before, but this is the Old Testament in the book of Revelation by Steve Moise. This is published by T&T Clark. Really interesting stuff in here. He raises two obvious questions that I want to look at. Okay, and it's this section right here. He says the two main questions that arise from John's use of this tradition concern the identity of those protected, the 144,000, and their relation to the great throng of Revelation 7:9, and what it is that they are protected from. So the question here is going to be, let's go back to, let's just keep this in context. Let's go back to Revelation 7, verse 9. So you've got this 144,000, okay, that we get through this list. And then we notice, and I believe someone actually mentioned this earlier as an observation, great multitude. We see this great multitude that no one could number. So I want you to notice, okay, here we have the 144,000. Then John says, after this I looked, and behold, a great multitude that no one could number. So the question is this: is the group in verse 9, is it the same group, or is it different? Now, this question came up when we, again, hopefully it came up when we read through Revelation 7. Okay, so after you get this list, right, then all of a sudden you get the great multitude. Then the description continues. So notice that you get the great multitude crying out, da 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 da, and then you get, therefore they are before the throne. You get this description of them and the ins and outs of it. They're hungry no more, for the Lamb is in the midst of them. And they get this special kind of blessing down here in verse 17. So again, I think it's a fair question. So the first major question that Moise brings up, okay, who are these guys? Who are the 144,000, and what's their relationship to those in verse 9? What is it that they're protected from? That's the major question. Now, let's address, I may or may not be able to get through both of these questions in the next 9 minutes, okay? But let's address the first one. Who are the 144,000? Okay. Now, let me find my all right. I'm looking at my, it's like I don't have the, sorry, I'm looking at my notes here and I don't see this exact, let me give me a second, guys. Let me search on this because I don't have the exact location. Let me find it, and then we'll be good to go. All right. Now I know where I'm at. Okay, so who are the 144,000? I love you guys' comments. So the sealing of the saints in Revelation 7 2 to 3 is almost certainly modeled on Ezekiel 9. Ezekiel 9, 4 and 6. Okay. Go through the city, through Jerusalem, and put a mark on the foreheads of those who sigh and groan over all the abomination that are committed in it. Cut down old men, and young women, like little children and women, but touch no one who has the mark. That seems awfully aggressive. Notice that these two are modeled very similar in what's going on. Now, Moise doesn't give you the full passage, okay? So I want to go actually to the full passage here, and we're going to read this entire passage just for some context, okay? This is another passage, another judgment scene passage where God is basically angry at Israel because of the abominations going on in the temple. And so God is effectively ticked off in this passage. We're going to read 6 verses here. Then he cried in my ears with a loud voice, saying, bring near the executioners of the city, each with his destroying weapon in his hand. And behold, 6 men came from the direction of the upper gate, which faces north, each with his weapon for slaughter in his hand. And with them was a man clothed in linen. There's that linen guy again, with a writing case at his waist. And they went in and stood beside the bronze altar. Now, the glory of the God of Israel had gone up from the cherub on which it rested to the threshold of the house. And he called to the man clothed in linen, who had the writing case at his waist. And the Lord said to him, pass through the city, through Jerusalem, and put a mark on the foreheads of the men who sigh and groan over all the abomination that are committed in it. And to the others he said in my hearing, pass through the city after him and strike. Your eye shall not spare, and you shall show no pity. Verse 6, kill old men outright, young men and maidens, little children and women, but touch no one on whom the mark, and begin at my sanctuary. So they began with the elders who were before the house. Whew. That is pretty crazy. Now, Bauckham is going to compare this, okay? Just notice. Then I saw another angel ascending from the rising of the sun and the ceiling of the living God, and he called out. Notice what he says here. Do not harm the earth or the sea or the trees until we have sealed the servants of our God on their foreheads. Okay, so Bauckham goes on. Actually, Moise, I'm sorry. I meant, I said the wrong individual. So he goes on and says, later tradition identified this sealing either with baptism, the laying on of hands, or the marking of the cross, and perhaps Paul's use of, what is this? I need to remember what this is. It's a sign. It's a sign of the cross. Okay. In 2 Corinthians 1:22. So, and who has also put his seal on us and given us his Spirit in our hearts as a guarantee. That's 2 Corinthians 1:22, and then Ephesians 1:13 also. So there's this concept of the seal that Paul is talking about, okay? Paul's use of this seal idea made this inevitable. All right. Welcome, Sonia. So here's what's going on. We have two different types of ing, of sealing, okay, that happen in Scripture. Ezekiel talks about in Ezekiel 9, and then Paul talks about another type of sealing in 2 Corinthians, and I'm just going to click through these so you have them, okay? Paul talks about, so we have the type in Ezekiel that was a brutal story. And then we have Paul talking about in 2 Corinthians 1:22, and who has the seal. You also get Paul talking about in Ephesians 1:13, the seal, the promised Holy Spirit. This is the actual seal. It is not the Sabbath. And do not grieve the Holy Spirit by whom you have been sealed. Okay, so there's two types of sealing here. Okay, and so Paul's using the word as well. And how it's weighted is where the idea of sealing a righteous person through baptism and the Holy Spirit, that's where that concept, that was that tradition, that Christian tradition concept of sealing came from, okay? Now, I don't think, this doesn't seem to be the context of what John is using to describe the image in Revelation 7. I don't think that's the proper context. But understand there's two contexts in the Old Testament that's going on. So the sealing in Revelation 7, I think, more closely aligns with the type of sealing in Ezekiel 9. Now, Moise is going to actually connect on this. It seems clear that John's meaning is closer to Ezekiel's, namely that God's people are to be given a special mark to protect them from the approaching slaughter. One further point of reference here. Now, I don't know where. Oh, right here, down here. One further point of interest is that the sealing episode is followed by an angel reaching into the altar and hurling fire onto the earth. This is Revelation 8:5. Then the angel took the censer and filled it with fire from the altar and threw it on the earth. A similar thing follows Ezekiel's account of the sealing. He said to the man clothed in linen, "Go within the wheelwork underneath the cherubim, fill your hands with burning coals from among the cherubim, and scatter them over the city." Now we're running out of time, but all of these points, I would argue, from the primary point of the census. So you have the census, the numbers, the tribes, and the identity of the 144,000 is the restoration of the tribes under the messianic soon-to-come age, the soon coming of Jesus. And so Aun, if we go to David Aun, and we're gonna land on this, we're gonna end on this, okay? David Aun brings this concept up as well, and he's going to say this: many who think that Revelation 7:4-8 is based on a Jewish source, that's what we were just talking about, right? Jewish tradition, Jewish source, hold that while the 144,000 may have originally referred to Jews or the real Israel, that source has been reinterpreted by the author to refer to a different group, such as the Christian church or Christian martyrs. And then they've got a couple of references here. There are others, however, who think that whether or not chapter 7:4-8 is based on a Jewish source, the text in its present context refers to Jews. All right. So this is where we're going to end, and we're going to pick back up next session, which is going to be hopefully a week from today. So here lies the challenge. And I want to see if you can, before the next time we get together, see if you can piece this challenge together and do some research and study. I've given you some of the sources. I'm going to say this again. Okay. I'm going to say this again. Please connect with me. If you want any of these to study on your own, to read, you want to read all the articles, please message me. Do not take my word for all of this stuff. Please read, study, research. Okay. But here lies the challenge and the difference of opinion. Even though this goes back to Ezekiel 9, David Allen is saying some scholars think John's interpreting it and applying it to Christians. And then there are others who disagree. Instead, they're saying, no, it's for all Jews. The 144,000 are Jews. They're not Gentiles. Okay, so I want you guys to catch how I phrased that, okay? Because you should feel an odd mixing up or conflation of the term Christian and Jew. You can still be a Christian, you can still be a believer, and be a Jew or a Gentile. But historically, in the history of interpretation, scholars have looked at this and said ethnic Jews are one group. The other one says, nope, they're Christians, the Christian church. But here's the question. Can't they still be Jews? If they're followers of Jesus, aren't they Christian? And I think sometimes we get caught up in this like separation between the two, okay? That doesn't need to happen. Next time when we get back together, after a week or so, I believe that we'll be back at it on Friday, a week from today. By the way, happy Mother's Day to all of the mothers out there. Happy Mother's Day on Sunday. We will be getting back into David Allen. We're going to dive back in and kind of further work through this dialogue, this section, this context. We're going to talk about the 12,000 numbers. If you noticed, there was lots of 12,000s. Why? Besides the fact that the 12, 12, 12, 12, 12, does it add up to 144,000? Okay. Besides all that, we're going to talk about the details of all that. Do not forget, don't forget that Friday, even if we're live, okay, on Friday, we may still be going live and dealing with Revelation. I may not do it on Friday. I may do it on Saturday. Just subscribe to the channel. I'll keep you posted. Here's the reality of what's going on, friends. We have a lot of content that's coming out on the channel. We are continuing to muscle our way through Revelation. That is our primary kind of working through in the live streams. But as we go through the content in Revelation, I'm coming out with additional content. We're going to be seeing coming up here a 7-part series on covenant theology. There's going to be some additional stuff on biblical exegesis, biblical hermeneutics, to continue to kind of equip you all with good biblical studies. You know that coming up next Friday, we have, I say you may or may not know this, but we have coming up next Friday, we have Brian Newman and the White Elephant in Seventh-day Adventists. That's coming up, Seventh-day Adventism. As an additional precursor, before the end of the month, we will also have on this channel, and this is why I want you to subscribe, share, tell everyone about this channel, because we also have Steve Daly that's going to be coming on the show a couple of weeks after Brian Newman. So we have a lot going on. We have a lot happening. You all are absolutely welcome for all of this. I'm grateful to do this. I'm excited to do this. Proud of being able to study with you guys. Can't wait to connect. Until next time, please stay in the Word, study deep, ask big questions, look intelligently at the Word of God, because we are asked to reason. We are asked to study. We want to dig deep. And I pray that you will be not only richly blessed with studying his word, but most importantly, that it's not just intellectual knowledge, that it actually transforms and changes your heart and changes who you are so that we can honor and image the Lord well in all that we do, say, and think. Be blessed, my friends. Enjoy the weekend, and we will see you next time. Okay.